You are tuned into the Merlin McQuanda Show.
Okay, welcome back. You're listening
You're
to the
listening to the Mariam
show,
Kwanda
and
Show,
joining
and
me in
joining me
studio
in studio
is
is
parenting
parenting or
psychologist and
psychologist
counselor
and
Aretha Bartlet. And we're going to be talking about early childhood development,
development,
rather
rather
mental.
mental.
Why am I fumbling, guys? I'm still in a little bit of a dwell, but forgive me. Infant and
Infant
early
and
childhood
early childhood
mental
mental
development with
development with the
counselor
counselor
and
and
psychologist Elretha
psychologist
Bartlet.
Elretha
Good
Bartlet.
morning,
Good
Elretha.
morning,
Good
Elretha.
morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for
Thank
joining
you
me
for
once
joining me
again.
once again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so
Right, so
mental health
mental health
illnesses are
illnesses are
associated with a
associated with a
long-standing social
long-standing social
stigma such
stigma
that
such that
many people
many
feel
people
too
feel too
ashamed to
ashamed
admit
to admit
that
that
they have a
they have a
problem
problem
and
and
that
that
they
they
would require
would
help
require
for that.
help for that.
And
And
because of
because
this
of
year, the
this year, the
stigma will
stigma
often
will often
apply
apply
inadvertently to
inadvertently
their
to
children,
their children,
and
and
they'll also
they'll
fail
also
to get
fail
help
to get
for their
help for their
children simply
children
because
simply
at some
because at
level the
some level the
caregivers
caregivers
feel too
feel too
embarrassed to
embarrassed
arrange
to
it.
arrange it.
So, in order
So
for
in
parents
order
and caregivers to understand or to be able to get the
get the
necessary help
necessary
or to
help to
understand what early
early
childhood
childhood
mental health
mental health
development is.
development
So,
is.
can you
So
please
can you
break
please
it down
break
for
it down?
us?
Okay, so early childhood
Early childhood
development, it
development
focuses on young children's needs and also psychological tasks that they need to complete at a young age. And for young children, they need to feel that they can trust the world, that they can trust their primary caregivers, and that the world is a safe place. And often, when that psychological need is not being met, we find that a lot of children develop psychological symptoms. So, in order for development to take place, that's the first need that needs to be met. And it often happens in relationship with a mother or the primary caregiver. So it's so important that a child can form a secure attachment with a primary caregiver. It often happens while the mother mirrors the baby. So they mirror the facial expressions, the body language. It helps the child to feel that she's being heard, she's being seen. But a lot of the development takes place in relationship with the mother. But we start seeing mental health issues when that relationship has been damaged somewhat, or when a child has experienced abandonment, or even if the mother experiences depression or anxiety, a child can also perceive some of those and also take on some of those symptoms.
Wow, so even postpartum depression can affect the child.
Definitely. So postpartum depression has an impact on the bonding between mother and child. Postpartum depression is very, very common.
Yes.
I think a lot of people have this expectation that having a new child is going to just be bliss. A lot of people have this. I think we've also sold this fairy tale that having a child is just going to be good and wonderful. But the reality is that being a parent is hard.
It is. It's hard. It's stressful. It's time consuming. It's everything that you can think of.
Definitely.
Because you're not just looking after yourself anymore, but you're looking after another human who is much smaller, so much more active, and sometimes will have some mental health issues that you have to look after. So, what are the common mental disorders that affect children?
Okay, so I would say common mental disorders that affect children are depression and anxiety. It's not as common in the baby years. Often it only comes up a bit later in a child's development. But things that we start seeing at a young age is attachment difficulties. So a child that either attaches too quickly to strangers, that form too close attachments to people that he or she doesn't even know is safe, or a child that is completely withdrawn. For instance, struggles to make a connection with a mother or with a father and is much more socially withdrawn. But depression and anxiety can come, so babies can suffer from depression and anxiety, but it is rare. Usually it only comes up a bit later in life.
Yeah, now how do you tell that your child is suffering from depression or anxiety? Because I mean, sometimes it is at the moment it's quite difficult to tell about an adult. Now you have a child, it's much. How do you go about that?
So I think early signs to look out for is if your child's behavior starts to change. So if the child is not interested in activities he or she used to be interested in, if the child is more withdrawn, doesn't make eye contact as much, if the child is more quiet, more reserved, more irritable, has anger outbursts, more frequent nightmares, these are all telltale signs of depression. But also if the child's sleeping patterns and appetite starts to change, I would also seek help.
All right. And how does infant and child mental health affect the family at large?
So I think everyone's mental health in a family has an impact on all the other family members. I think especially children can absorb a lot what's going on in the family. And a child who suffers from depression or anxiety, it's a child who's going to have a lot more needs. They're going to ask more of the parents. So I think for the parents, it might be very exhausting. And some might feel quite overburdened and overwhelmed, not knowing how to deal with a child.
And this comes down to trusted relationships. And it is said that the child's development is, or rather the golden years of a child is from the time that they are born up until the age of 2 or 3, because that's when the child's brain is developing. So how important are trusted relationships during this time?
Very important. So like I said earlier, the first psychological task to develop is to trust. And this task is going to have an impact on the child's relationships later in life as well. So the relationship with the primary caregiver is going to shape the child's future relationships. And the first task is not just to trust the mother, but to trust that the world is safe, that my needs will be met in this world, that it's not a scary or frightening place.
Yeah. Sometimes, I think it's just because of people and how they perceive things. But every time when you hold your child too much, then people are like, no, don't carry your child too much, because then they're going to be too attached to you. And then, as a parent, you also don't want your child to be attached too much to strangers, because, who knows what could happen to them. So is there anything wrong with that, being attached too much to your child, or is there a time limit for how long you're supposed to hold your child?
I've heard it a lot. I've heard people say, but I don't want to spoil my baby.
Yeah.
So my opinion is I don't think one can spoil a baby. I think a baby needs to depend on the primary caregiver. So I think it is important to hold the baby and for the baby to experience that comfort, especially during the first year.
Yeah.
So from a psychological perspective, a child is only ready to separate from the primary caregiver when they're 18 months old, so a year and a half. So before that age, one cannot expect that the child should be too independent or do things by him or herself. So I think it's then okay to have that attached bond. It's actually very important.
Yeah, well, there you heard it for yourself from a psychologist, Elretha Bartlet. It's not, there's nothing wrong with that. You can carry your child as much as you want to, and you're not spoiling him or her, you're not babying them too much. You are creating a bond, a necessary bond that you are supposed to have. And there's also a backlash when it comes to moms who choose to stay at home and look after their kids, especially in the first year or the first 2 years. And people are like, no, you must go back to work, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you can't you can't just sit at home and look after your kids. But you can, because you are helping them develop into a better human being, and you have to start by laying the foundation so that when they do grow up, they will appreciate what you've done for them.
Yeah.
And what is the impact of mental disorders in children? Like, how does it affect them as they grow older?
So often children don't always outgrow the mental health issues. So in adulthood, it can become worse. So children who have been depressed or anxious as babies tend to grow up into adults who experience depression and anxiety, and also experience more severe mental health issues. So it has a lasting impact on people's development, definitely.
And how do we help the kids?
Okay, so for me, the most important thing is when you work with a very small child, so a baby, it's important to work with the primary caregiver and the child, and to focus mainly on the attachment between the mother and the child, or the primary caregiver and the child. It's not so much focusing then on the child individually, because most of the child's needs are being met through that relationship.
Yeah.
So it's about strengthening that attachment, that bond. So if the mother or primary caregiver can learn to be attuned to the child, attuned to all their emotional needs, and try to understand what's going on in the mind of the child, then it will already benefit the mental health difficulties. So mental health difficulties in childhood is often as a result of some of those emotional needs not being met.
Now, what if the child has another mental disorder like ADHD?
So ADHD often gets diagnosed when children are 5 or 6. It can be diagnosed at a younger age, but often that's when some of the symptoms start to show. So ADHD, it is a genetic. There is a genetic basis. But definitely what is important is also to provide containment for that child. So I do believe that each child has the ability to develop, an inherent capacity to develop. But the primary responsibility of parents is to contain, to make the child feel safe and to fulfill their emotional needs. And often the other things will then happen spontaneously.
Okay, if in a situation whereby the primary caregiver is not the parent, how do you help the caregiver?
So I would help the caregiver in the same way that I would help the child. So I would also focus on what their attachment is like, what the relationship is like. For instance, if it's an adopted child, I would focus on them also putting in more effort to build that attachment. I think with adopted parents, there are more challenges because the child has also experienced an early trauma.
Yes.
They've been, in many cases, abandoned by their biological parents. So as the adopted parents, there's a huge responsibility to contain that for the child.
All right. So thank you, Elretha, for your time. Quickly share your contact details with our listeners, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Like I said, I'm Elretha Bartlet. I work in Parktown North in private practice. My contact details, my number is 079-82-60706. Email address, elretha.bartlett@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for your time, Elretha.
Thank you so much. You too.
Right, that was Elretha Bartlet, counseling and psychologist in Parktown North, taking us through infant mental health and early childhood mental development. And you may contact her if you would like to know more information about it. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section. And you can also send them to us on WhatsApp. The number is 0617660355. You are listening to the Mariam Mukonda Show on Salam Media. We will be right back.